Welcome back. We are going to be creating our color wheel with our watercolors today. So here is our basic color wheel that we're going to walk through. First thing I'm going to have you do is I'm just going to have you label these different things. So I'm going to grab a pencil and we're going to go ahead and label. So when we're labeling, we first need to know what are our primary and our secondary colors. Our primary colors are going to be red, yellow, and blue. These are the colors that you cannot create and you use to mix together to create all of the other colors. So that brings us to our secondary colors. So for our secondary colors, it's two primaries mixed together. So red and yellow is orange. Red and blue is violet, and yellow and blue is going to be green. So those are our primary and our secondary. So that brings us to our actual color wheel. And so we can start figuring out what that looks like. The larger circles are going to represent your primary colors. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put those in here. The medium circles are going to be our secondary. So when we mix red and yellow, we get orange. When we mix red and blue, we get violet. So make sure you're putting them in the appropriate spot in between the correct primaries. When you mix yellow and blue, you get green. Okay? And then the little ones that are left are going to be our intermediate colors. So that's when you mix a primary and a secondary. So yellow and green is yellow, green. I'm going to do the shorthand for this. Green and blue, a lot of people want to say green, blue, but the trick is with your intermediate colors that to say them correctly, you have to always put primary first. Primary colors are kind of bossy like that, and so they always have to go first. So green and blue together is blue, green, not green, blue. That means that blue and violet is blue, violet. Violet and red is red, violet. Red and orange is red, orange. Orange and yellow is yellow, orange. So once I'm done with this part, then I'm ready to start actually painting it in. Usually I suggest always mixing colors. Don't use the straight colors straight from your watercolor palette. However, we're trying to create these flat colors, and so good news, you can just use them for this. So I'm going to activate my colors. I'm going to use red first, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fill in my red, and I'm going kind of quickly for this video. You can take your time with this because it's really good practice to go around the edges first. Practice making sure that you have enough paint on your brush, and then fill it in. And you can see that the paper itself gets kind of, I don't know, wet. It looks a little bit dark and speckly. That's because the paper is just plain copy paper, and so it can't really support the watercolor super well, and it gets a little bit translucent. It'll dry, and most of that'll go away when it's all dry, as long as you don't put too much water on it. But that's why we do our final projects on watercolor paper, because it won't do that. Watercolor paper is going to be a lot thicker, and it's going to be able to hold that paint. So I'm just going through, and I'm getting my primary colors. I'm cleaning in between colors to make sure that I'm not mixing these already, because that is not my intention. There's my blue. I'm just going right over my labels. Is with watercolors, they are a little bit see-through, and so you should be able to still see those labels just fine. Okay, primary colors are done. I'm going to clean off my brush, and I'm going to go ahead and get my secondary colors. Nice that I went ahead and pre-labeled them so that I can find where everything goes. Clean off my brush, go for my green, make sure I have enough water in my green. I could also just mix the green with my primary colors, but since you already have it, and we're going to be mixing our intermediate colors, then go ahead and use what you have. Work smarter, not harder. All right. So here are all of our primary and our secondary colors painted in. So now I'm ready to actually start mixing for my intermediate colors. So I'm going to do that in the top part of my palette. So I'm going to actually move this over a little bit so you can see. When I go to mix, I'm going to start, I usually like to start with just a little bit of water in that lid, in that palette. And then let's say for yellow orange, you're always going to start with the lightest color and slowly add the darker color in. So I'm going to start with yellow. I'm going to clean off my brush and I'm going to add just a little bit of orange in until I like the color. This looks pretty good. And then I'm going to apply that in. The reason we do that is because if we start with the darker color and slowly add the lighter color, you usually end up needing a lot more of the lighter color than the darker one. So you end up creating a lot of paint. Whereas if you start with the lighter one, you can just add a little bit of the dark one and be in a lot more control, and you don't end up having to make so much paint. So I'm going to grab some plain water. I'm going to start with orange because it's lighter. And then I'm going to add a little bit of red. And there's my red orange. I'm gonna grab some water here. Start with red because it's lighter. Add a little bit of violet. Grab some water. Now both violet and blue are pretty dark. I'm gonna start with violet because it has red in it, which is a little bit lighter. And then I'm gonna add a little bit of blue. And I might even go back and add a little bit more violet, just so it's got a little, there we go, a little better mix. That's pretty. All right, blue, green. I'm gonna start with green. Add some water there. Then add a little bit of blue. Makes a pretty aqua color. If while you're working, you end up realizing like you got a little bit of green or something into a color you don't like, just grab a clean brush and kind of wipe it out and dry off your brush. You should be fine. You can always clean out your stuff. Okay, so yellow, green, I'm gonna start with yellow, definitely, it's way lighter. And see, that's kind of what I'm talking about right there. I got a little bit of green in there, so I can just kind of wipe out the green. And then I'm gonna add just a little bit of green. And do my yellow, green. And there you go. So now my color wheel is done. This is really helpful, especially if you're trying to dilute a color or desaturate a color so you don't want it to be as bright. You can look at your color wheel and use the opposite color, and you know that that's going to take down the saturation and make it more of a neutral. So let's say I have this bright blue and I want it to be more of a like diluted, desaturated blue. Then, so here's a bright blue. I'm going to clean off my brush. I'm going to add just a little bit of orange because that's opposite. And that's how I can desaturate it, okay? I can also, if I add enough orange, that's how I would make brown. I have to add quite a bit of it. but you can see it's starting to desaturate it and get to that brown. You also have a brown that you can use and you can manipulate. And so I have now dirtied up my orange. So I am actually just going to get that water out of there, and then it's nice and clean and it's ready to keep going. Down at the bottom, this is just kind of a little helpful hint to help you work through each of these. So it's basically what we did up here. You use your 2 different colors to create your secondary. So I use my blue and my yellow to create my green, which is a secondary color. I use my yellow and my red to create my orange. I use my, oh, I already used yellow. So I use my red and my blue. And you can look up here if you need to remember, red and blue equals violet. And so that's how I get to all my secondary colors. When I'm trying to get my tertiary, tertiary is another term for intermediate. Kind of like violet and purple. I mean the same thing, you just have different versions of it. And so I keep referring to it as intermediate, but that's going to be all of these. These are all your tertiary or your intermediate colors. And so when you're mixing your primary and your secondary, you get your intermediate. And so to do that, I would do my, and I already have them mixed over here. So I would do my purple. You don't need to do all of them. There's only 3 spots, but purple and blue equals blue-violet. My green and blue equals my, I still have it in my lid, so I can just use it. My blue-green. And then let's do yellow and orange for a different color equals my yellow-orange. Okay, so there's some different examples of my intermediate. Now over here, it's saying, okay, this is how you get shades, tints, and tones. So a shade is going to be any color plus black. So those are going to be your darker ones. A tint is any color plus white. However, we know that with watercolors, you don't add white. There is no option for white. So instead, you just add more water. Okay. And then a tone is going to be something that uses both. So it's going to be more gray. So for us, we can just do, let's just pick a color. Let's use blue. And we'll do it for a couple of them. So blue plus black. I'm going to grab some straight black just for this. And then I'm going to mix it out here. So I'm going to start with some blue. I'm going to add the tiniest bit of black because black is really overpowering. And that is going to be my shade. Okay, and I might add a little bit more so make sure we get the idea. There we go. So it's kind of like a navy color. Blue plus just white is just water. So I'm going to grab blue, but now I'm going to add more water to it. It's going to be my tint. And then I can do that with one more color because I'm not going to mix like a tone. Tones work when we're using different kinds of paint. It doesn't work with watercolors. And this color wheel worksheet is for any kind of paint. So let's just do red. Let's pull some red off to the side and grab the tiniest bit of black. Oh, and I forgot to put in my just plain black. Right? All right. So now I have worked through my entire color wheel. I have practiced creating every major color. So my primary, my secondary, my intermediate or tertiary, whatever you want to call it. I've practiced creating some tints and some shades. And so now you're ready to move on to some different tutorials.